Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. November 21st, 2024, the Trump's Cabinet Keeps Getting Weirder edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. From New Haven, Connecticut, where she continues to represent the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School, Emily Bazelon. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David. Hey, John.
And from New York City, where he continues to represent CBS News, where he's prepping for his big transition to be co-anchor of the CBS Evening News, John Dickerson. Hello, John.
Hello, David and Emily. I'm really uncomfortable that my camera is not working right now, but I'm smiling at you both.
John is a black rectangle. This week on the Gabfest, Trump is assembling a made-for-TV cabinet. Who will make the decisions that matter? Is it a cabinet that makes sense? Is it going to carry out what he wants to carry out? How many of them will be indicted? Then the Texas Board of Education approves a Christian and Bible-infused public school curriculum. Is it legal? Is it okay? Then we'll be joined by the Washington Post's Dan Diamond to talk through how a Trump administration and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as HHS Secretary could change public health and endanger public health, I suppose. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. And I'm sorry to say, for Gabfest listeners who didn't get a chance to get tickets, our live show at the Bell House on December 4th is sold out. So there are no more tickets available for that show where we do our annual Conundrum discussion. So you are not going to find out whether an octopus punches or kicks. I actually have a whole new thesis on that one. I am gonna come in hot on that one. I have a new idea. But we look forward to seeing those of you who can make it. And if you still have a conundrum, please submit it to us at slate.com/conundrums. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Mint Mobile. With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And Charlie says he thinks the Mint Mobile deal is amazing. He's on the $15 a month deal and is getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. Charlie says more people should be trying this out. All Mint plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/gabfest. That's mintmobile.com/gabfest. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/gabfest. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 50 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. A quick note before we get started. We taped the show before Matt Gaetz announced he was withdrawing from consideration as Attorney General, which is too bad because it would have been really interesting to talk about that. At this point, it is almost easier to list the Trump proposed cabinet officials who have not been accused of sexual misbehavior. And certainly it'd be definitely easier to list the ones who haven't had strong TV careers. I don't even know if there's any of them who haven't had a strong TV career. Matt Gaetz has been accused of sex with a minor and also paying for sex. Pete Hegseth is accused of paying to make a sexual assault allegation disappear. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was accused of sexual misbehavior with a babysitter a long time ago and lots of creepy sexual behavior since. Trump, of course, found liable for sexual assault. There's lots of other weird stuff in the Trump cabinet. Most of these folks, along with other more anodyne choices like Marco Rubio and Transportation Secretary would-be Sean Duffy, also a reality TV star, will be approved by the Senate. We should talk about maybe the shocking nature of some of these nominees, but also sort of substantively what these nominees, some of whom we've talked about a bit already, but what these nominees are telling us about how a Trump presidency would work. How would a Medicare and Medicaid overseen by Dr. Oz work, and would it work? So let me start, Emily, with a particular weird synergy that all of these various nominees of Trump's have shared the same sin of same failing of sexual assault. Is that something where such people are drawn to Trump? Are they drawn to him? Is he drawn to them? Is it just like that's no longer a disqualification in public life?
I mean, I think the no longer a disqualification is a point that Trump is trying to make loud and clear. And I think we should specify there are accusations of this sort against Pete Hegseth and Elon Musk and Matt Gaetz and RFK Jr. It's not every single one of them, but 4 is a lot. And I think it's for sure a rebuke to the Me Too movement and the idea that women coming forward, even if there are reasons to believe them, like corroborating reasons, that's not going to be enough to sink someone's nomination. I think the second part of this is just like a big power move by Donald Trump, that if he can get the Republican Senate to go along with these nominations, either by not gaveling in, and so there are recess appointments and they don't take the vote, or by affirmatively voting to confirm someone like Matt Gaetz, he's just saying to them, like, I am in charge. You are nothing. Normally, these kinds of people would not even get a chance, but I've blessed them and you have to kiss my ring by going along with it. And that's kind of breathtaking.
David, you said they were made for TV candidates. They were made for CCTV with an audience of 1, and that's Donald Trump. If they were broadly appealing, well, that one of the tests will be if they are broadly appealing. Their TV careers have been narrow casted. And so at the very least, even the television pick of it is a narrow casting. It's not somebody with broad popular appeal. It's somebody who's been popular in a kind of very specific precincts. I would also just throw in there that Linda McMahon, there's at least one lawsuit that said she enabled sexual exploitation. And there's also obviously her relationship with her husband, with whom I think she's separated, estranged, or divorced. But Vince McMahon also had to step down at WWE because of some sexual allegations. So that you got another cabinet member who's swimming in those same waters.
Do you think that it is a feature or a bug that so few of these people have any kind of executive experience running a major organization?
Bug. I bug if, sorry to just trundle in there with my size 9s, Emily, but I mean, it's a feature for...
You only wear size 9s?
No, it's a line from Vera, procedural.
Okay.
I mean, for Donald Trump, it's a feature for sure, because he doesn't hold much stock in these dumb government bureaucracies. And if the deep state is unhappy because the people running them have no background and no organizational experience, well, then that's wonderful. So for him, it's a feature. In reality, it's a bug. I spent a good deal of time trying to figure out what makes a good administration for the book. And obviously a presidency is a team, not a single person. And what you find when you talk to people who've been successful in administrations is the team really matters. And that's, of course, true in organizations. CEOs, when they were surveyed and said, what's the one thing you worry the most about in your corporation? Number 1 was finding good talent that can do what? Can execute. It's great to have great ideas, as any of us know who've been involved in a team. It's great to have a lot of energy. The execution gap happens between energy and ideas and actual execution. And as Michael Bloomberg said about trying to run something, it's like learning to ski on a double black diamond. It's complicated. You can't be doing it for the first time. And the reason that matters, and I want to talk to Dan about this, is that there are real things at stake. I mean, there are Medicare, Medicaid. The Department of Justice does a whole host of things outside of the retribution that Donald Trump wants Matt Gaetz to be involved in. And somebody without any operational or organizational experience at the head of all of that, this will be the grandest test of whether putting novices in high stakes positions can work. There is no long history of its success in the past, either in government or other organizations.
I agree with that, John. I mean, I feel, though, that it is possible that you could come in and you could know what you don't know, and then a lot of the federal government could continue to operate on the basis of the career public servants who do a lot of the work, right? You could just say, okay, I'm going to let you guys tell me what needs to happen, and that could be fine. I do find quite worrisome the idea, though, that you could come in to do mischief and you could create a special channel, a task force that has a lot of power to mess around with everybody. So, for example, this idea of warrior boards, of course, branded in this macho way, that are going to be at the Department of Defense and are going to review the resumes and the records of generals who served in Afghanistan, or probably just anyone in the military who is on Donald Trump's blacklist and then like propose that they're going to be dismissed. It's those kind of end runs around the bureaucracy and around the normal operation of the department that like I'm kind of obsessed with right now.
Well, they've promised to take a chainsaw, as Vivek Ramaswamy said, to the bureaucracy. I mean, they're actively engaged in destroying the bureaucracy, which, you know, many people may think that's a great thing. The government needs to be shaken up. The thing is, you need people to carry out and execute the stuff you want done. One of the arguments is that these are distractions essentially from the stuff that the lower level people that Trump will put in will go and do. And that's a perfectly plausible argument. But you still need the lower level people to go and do that stuff. And doing stuff, turns out, is hard. You need leaders who are compelling and so forth.
I mean, just to explain one more step of Ramaswamy's plan, his idea is that you're going to have constitutional lawyers, as he calls them, come in and review all these regulations and say that actually they're not necessary, that in fact, like they're an overstep by the agency, and that instead of asking the Supreme Court to overturn them, we're just going to not enforce them. And so that's how you're going to justify, he's talking about like a 50% cut to the federal ranks, that you're just not going to enforce all these laws. Oh, and then also, by the way, you're going to challenge the Impoundment Act, which is this law from 1974 that says that the president has to implement programs that Congress has paid for. And, you know, if Ramaswamy can get the Supreme Court to go along with those plans, like then you really do have a transformed Washington. Obviously, there's a lot of steps between here and there, but that's the idea.
But I'm sure you can have a transformed Washington. I think they can break a lot of stuff. I think they massively underestimate right now how much support there is for the overwhelming majority of the work that the government does. People don't want their airplanes to crash, right? So you could say, like, we shouldn't have regulations about overseeing Boeing and overseeing airplane manufacture or like doing investigations of airplane crashes. And I think most people would be like, well, I actually would like that to happen. I would like there to be trained air traffic controllers that who are working there. That seems like a good idea. Or, you know, we don't want to fund all these researchers at the Department of Agriculture who are just like, you know, doing agricultural test programs everywhere. And it's like, actually, all those agricultural test programs are why we're able to then become the most productive agricultural economy in the world. And so I am positive there's billions and billions of dollars of government spending that they can get rid of, and government employees by the thousands that they can get rid of, and people won't complain that much. I'm not confident that they know which ones those are. And I think what they might end up doing is just like taking an axe to a whole bunch of stuff that people really need and want. And they are going to regret it. The country's going to regret it. And mostly the country's going to regret it because the competence of the government is going to decline, and the government's going to become much less good at doing things. And that's going to be a disaster.
And I think people who are listening to what you just said, David, will say, well, Trump did all this stuff during the campaign and they elected him anyway. The conditions that would make it different in this case that you just described are a couple of things. One, he's now on the hook for an administration. People can't just vent their unhappiness with the situation in the world by voting against the incumbent administration. In the off-year elections, they will punish whoever's blamed for the chaos that you describe. And the chaos that you describe may very well touch them in their lives, particularly in the healthcare area, where it really, really matters. You also are going to have just the general level of chaos, economic and otherwise. It's hard to imagine that the markets won't react to that and won't do things that at least will create hiccups that, you know, an administration might get blamed for. And so you're going to have members of Congress who worry about losing in their districts concerned. And so the chaos there is a new route for the chaos to actually create pressure that didn't exist in 2024 in the election.
I like this vision of accountability.
Well,
it's reassuring.
I mean, what we're assuming is that gravity exists, right?
Yes.
The old cliche about they're trying to build a plane while flying it. They're actually trying to fly a plane while dismantling the plane. And the question is, does
well done.
That was an epic Dickerson hit.
So the question then is, does gravity exist? Because sure, you can take out the like ashtrays from when people used to smoke on planes, but like if you decide that engines, and here comes a big mountain, then things kick in.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be an interesting test of Congress because individual members of Congress, obviously, most of them are on the Republican side are do feel a deep sense of loyalty to Trump, and they also feel a kind of they've got to run with the herd, and they don't dare to be too bold. But on the other hand, if terrible things are happening to people in their district, if people are not getting their Social Security check, or if the highway is not getting built because transportation department is no longer, able to approve contracts because they've gotten rid of the contract approving authority of the Department of Transportation, there will be ugliness. I wonder if my actual question more is are they basically just going to go after the departments that no Republican cares about? They'll just go after education and the EPA,
and PBS, and they'll pick
and they kind of won't bother with. They're not going to. I don't think the Defense Department. I don't think there's going to be thousands of people fired at the Defense Department.
I think you're exactly right, especially since a lot of the procurement and defense spending and basically government transfers. If you overlay the U.S. map and government transfers, there's a lot of red Trump districts that are involved, and so you might have some clashes there. I think you're right. I think a lot of it's symbolic. And don't forget the important symbolism of just being able to rail at the deep state. If it fails, you can argue it's just as useful as if it succeeds, because you can say, the fact that we failed at shrinking government is only proof of how virulent and how terrible it is and how mighty our cause is. It's not unlike the election integrity. The fact that we found no evidence of any election malfeasance is in fact proof of its virulence. And by the way, I'm still, to be perhaps stupidly optimistic, I think the fact that everybody might have to defend certain government spending in an open and public debate, if such a thing would happen, would be perfectly fine and great. However, I don't think if Elon Musk is involved in the public debate, we've seen that his view of public debate and actual public debate that would be helpful are two vastly different things.
So true. I mean, one thing I'm thinking about is that maybe one way of guessing which of these threats of government defenestration will be carried out is to just look at a map of where the money is going. And if the government money is going toward people who are powerful in the Trump administration and the Republican Party, i.e. our capitalist overlords, then those cuts will not happen. That's not going to be where it goes. But, thinking about the Defense Department or the Justice Department, I do still worry about stringing people up in a way that makes an example of a few people who have a history of government service as a way of cowing everybody else and showing that Trump really meant it when he was talking about retribution. I mean, for sure, he's going to follow through on some of those threats because it's one thing that he actually cares about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that matters also in the FBI, for example, where
yes.
It's not that they don't want the FBI to exist. They just want the FBI to not investigate the people they don't want them to investigate.
Yeah.
And they would love the FBI to investigate other people. But yeah, I think you're totally right. I think there's a category of departments which the Republicans don't like, where I think they will gut them heavily. And that I would say that's State Department, EPA, HUD, Education, Department of Interior, those ones. And then there's a category of ones which everyone supports, and they will transportation. The transportation will still continue. Ag will still continue, I think. The interesting ones are the ones where there is this sort of culture war debate, and that's defense and Department of Justice. And those are the ones I think that'll be most contentious.
Can I say on the weaponization of government piece, which you touched on when talking about the FBI, Trump said that the reason he's naming Matt Gaetz is because he's going to stop the weaponization of government. And your point is that, no, they're not going to stop it. They're going to just make it for their ends of weaponization. Matt Gaetz, I think it's not crazy to say his best effort in stopping the weaponization of the Justice Department is in fact his own case, because the Biden Justice Department in fact investigated Matt Gaetz but didn't bring charges, which he's using as the central piece of exculpatory evidence. So he's unlikely to actually do anything to end the weaponization of the Justice Department, but in fact he is proof of the lack of weaponization in the current one, in that it's one of his major pieces of exculpatory information. So that little paradox seems to me to be clear. Emily, can you just remind everybody of other things the Justice Department does that if its AG is focused on retribution, what other kinds of things then would be left either in other people's hands or would go unattended?
I mean, there's the Civil Rights Division that decides how to enforce our civil rights laws. There's antitrust. I mean, there's a huge set of decisions to be made in the Justice Department and, in places like the FCC about whether to continue actions against particularly big tech companies. And then there's just like the bread and butter of criminal and civil law enforcement all through the federal government that, the Justice Department has more than 100,000 people who work in it.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Aura. The holidays are all about connecting with loved ones, and there is no better way to do that than with a digital picture frame from Aura. Wirecutter called it the best digital photo frame. I also call it the best digital photo frame, and it is easy to see why. I love my Aura frames. Last night, in fact, we moved our Aura frame. It had been on a sort of low shelf in our living room, and we were doing some feng shui rearranging, and we moved it up to this high shelf right next to the TV, and it's even better. And we were watching TV last night, and there were all these wonderful pictures of my kids flashing up there. I absolutely adore the Aura frame. Everyone in my family loves the Aura frame. It's a subject of conversation. I've given it as gifts to mothers, friends, in-laws, and it is maybe the best gift you can give in the holiday season, especially if you preload it with wonderful photos. For a limited time, visit auraframes.com and get $45 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames by using promo code GABFEST at checkout. That's AURAFrames.com, promo code GABFEST. This exclusive Black Friday Cyber Monday deal is their best of the year, so don't miss out. Terms and conditions apply. Support for the Gabfest comes from USA for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. This winter, your gift to USA for UNHCR will make all the difference. As temperatures drop, your generosity brings critical relief to those forced to flee and facing winter far from home. Your gift to UNHCR gives core relief items like food, blankets, shelter, and fuel for heaters. These life-saving essentials are quickly transported to warehouses around the globe, ready to be delivered by UNHCR's dedicated teams. It's a race against time to provide more than just the basics for those in need. UNHCR's swift response, fueled by your support, ensures refugees and displaced people receive life-saving aid, helping them survive the harshest conditions. UNHCR is committed to using every dollar wisely and turning your compassion into action. Help those in need stay warm and safe. Your gift is matched for a limited time. Give now at unrefugees.org/winter.
Planned Parenthood Federation of America exists so that all people can get access to the sexual and reproductive care and education they need to make informed decisions about their health. More than 2 million patients a year rely on the services Planned Parenthood health centers provide, like STI testing and treatment, birth control, gender-affirming care, abortion, cancer screenings, and so much more. Right now, all across the country, reproductive health care and rights are under attack from public officials who are out of step with the will of the vast majority of Americans. The constitutional right to abortion, control of our bodies, and the health care we need has been stolen from us. And now politicians in 47 states, yes, 47, have introduced bills that would block people from getting the sexual and reproductive care they need. Planned Parenthood knows that equitable access to health care, including safe, legal abortion, is a human right. Right now, Planned Parenthood needs your help to protect access to health care. Donate today by visiting plannedparenthood.org/protect.
The Texas board that approves curricula this week gave initial approval to the Bluebonnet curriculum, which is an elementary school curriculum for Texas public schools that infuses lessons with biblical teachings and Christian thought, much more than previous curricula, much more than it acknowledges the existence or value of other religions. Schools in Texas, assuming it gets final approval, will have the option to use the Bluebonnet curriculum. So they don't have to use it.
Financial incentives.
But they will also, I'm getting there. Can I finish the sentence?
No.
They will also get $60 per student extra if they use it. So they are smallly incentivized to use it. So this is part of a wave of Christianizing that we're seeing in public schools across the South. Oklahoma is paying millions to put Bibles in all classrooms. It's also trying to give public funds to a Christian charter school. Louisiana has mandated the posting of the 10 Commandments in all school classrooms. That's caught up in litigation, but continues. Texas, I think, is about to do the same on the Ten Commandments. Emily, just where does this Christianizing movement for public schools come from, and how is the Bluebonnet the latest manifestation?
You know, Christians are a strong majority in the United States, and it's really only been in the last several decades that there has been a move by the courts to remove Christianity from the public sphere in various ways, right? So the decision not to allow prayer in the schools, which was really about Christian prayer, that's pretty recent. That's from the 1960s. When you go back to the 19th century, it was entirely common for public schools to teach the Bible. That was just like part of the canon. And I think that one good faith version of trying to bring religious instruction, or like particularly the Christian version of the Bible, into schools is that there's a lacking moral foundation here, and that you can fill it in with these teachings, which are enormously powerful to lots of people. And then I think that idea of like really infusing schools with religion, you know, it is Christian groups and people who really follow these teachings who are pushing for this. What you hear in the rhetoric, though, is the idea of like, well, the Bible is really central to literature and art and culture, and so kids need to appreciate its historical significance. And I think that makes for a really good talking point, right? But then when you look at some of the examples from the Bluebonnet curriculum about how this is actually going to work, it seems like kids are going to be learning scripture the way they would learn it in Sunday school, as opposed to like, because they're trying to understand a painting.
I went and actually read some of these materials, and it's what strikes me is how the infusion of the kind of woke beta mindset. I mean, here's a passage. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. And then later the king says, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, then you did not do it to me. I mean, to push that message is so beta and soft.
Ironic, John. It's the new John for today.
John, is that from the gospel?
Yes, it's from Matthew.
I thought so. Right. Well, it is interesting. Like,
well, no, but I mean, that's not what they're not like nailing the Beatitudes on the wall. And so while the lesson plans include this, it does not include what I just read. That's from the Bible, but that's not. That's from the Bible. That's just my point is that, you know, when they talk about having the moral code infused by the Bible, it's the selective use of that document. And if you, in fact, use the Beatitudes or the portion of Matthew that I just read, I think you would have considerable fights. And we should also mention that the reason this matters is because Texas textbooks have a disproportionate effect on the textbooks in other states, because Texas is so large, it shapes the market.
I mean, first of all, I do think that the centrality of the Bible to our culture and our history, and the centrality of Christianity to our culture and our history, is like, you can't argue with that. It's like totally true. And it's also, it needs to be taught. Like, people do need to understand the culture that they come out of, and they do need to understand how it shaped, like, you know, the Enlightenment thought that led to, you know, and shaped it both in action and reaction. The Enlightenment thought that led to the founding, it shaped the abolitionist movement, it shaped the civil rights movement, it shaped also, you know, the movements in opposition to all of those things. That Christianity, it is like ludicrous to say that any other religion has had, you know, 1/50th the impact on the United States as Christianity. Like, right. I'm a Jew. Like, I'm proud of Judaism. There've been great Jews have had a nice role in Jewish history. Good for us.
A good run there.
But it's like just so much less important to American history and culture than Christianity is. And so, and Islam too, and Hinduism too, and, you know, any other religion you can name. And so you do need to grapple with a way of teaching it. And I suspect that we've gone a long way away, long distance in public schools away from including it. There's just been a fear of including much about Christianity in schools. And I guess I can't get too, also I went to private schools that were Christian, and I went in both England and the US, and it's just not that bad. It's just like schools are not that good at teaching much of anything. Well, and they're certainly not that good at teaching religion in such a way that you're going to feel indoctrinated. That's not where people are going to get indoctrinated. That's not where they're going to get influence. They're going to get influence in all kinds of other ways. And I think the idea that this is going to create a, cadre, there's a cadre of poor, non-Christian children who are going to suddenly end up at evangelical churches because they're being taught this in public school is just like, that's nonsensical.
Well, I don't think that's the only argument. I think the argument is if you're wearing a hijab to school and the implicit support of the entire institution is of a different religion, you're going to feel that you're not a part of the. But your point, obviously, about the centrality of Christianity to the American story is true. But I'm not certain that that's the only motivation, so that people don't have to go to the footnotes to understand the allusion in whatever piece of literature that they're reading, that their understanding of the Bible will be such that they have a fuller understanding of whatever the primary literature is that they're reading. Since this is for kindergarten to fifth grade, I can't imagine a lot of instances in which that's pedagogically crucial. I think as a moral question, what's really interesting theologically is if you say this is to help shape the moral foundation of these kids, which is a perfectly fine argument, then it seems to me the problem you run into is normally what happens is when the state does something that is religious, and then people make the kind of glib point I made earlier about, well, if you're going to believe this part of the Bible, why don't you believe this part? They then turn to Matthew and say, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, which is essentially says, it's one passage. There are other passages that say the exact opposite, but it's essentially, we don't always have to follow everything that's in the Bible because there are secular things that are secular requirements that we also have to follow. But not if you're saying this is a moral code that you have to instill in your kids. That removes, it seems to me, the Caesar exit ramp. So now you really do have to wrestle with what is morally in the actual text. And that, if you really want to do that, that's fine. But that doesn't seem, from what's discussed here, to be the actual project involved, is to wrestle with the actual message in the Bible as opposed to cherry picking from it.
They cherry picked it. What is school if not an act of cherry picking? It's like school is always an act of cherry picking. You select things that you think will serve your end, and sometimes that end is teaching physics. In physics you don't teach little kids every bit about the quantum theory,
right? But you do teach them that gravity makes things drop. You don't say that it makes things go up.
Well, and I feel like the examples that have been given in Christianity and morality in this case are that it's emphasized the Christian basis for the opposition to slavery without emphasizing the Christian basis for the support of slavery, which is equally true. But like history curricula in this country and the history of the United States as it's told to increase civic engagement is full of pious lies. We lie about what we've done. And I feel like that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do to create a sense of civic pride, like to tell people, yes, the movement that helped destroy slavery comes out of Christianity. Seems to me to be like, that's fine. It's good to tell people that. It makes people feel better.
But you wouldn't agree with the pious lie of the lost cause.
I would not agree with the pious lie of the lost cause,
right.
But I wouldn't. Yeah, yes, that's true. I would not agree with that.
I guess I have two questions. One is to go back to this question of the effect on kids in the class who are not Christian. The history you're talking about, the influence of Christianity, totally concede, David. But now we live in this world in which, there are more Muslim kids. They're not more Jewish kids, but there are some. And there are a lot of kids who are not growing up in the church, right? Even if the background of their families is Christian in some way. I do think it can make those kids feel lesser to be in a classroom in which one religion is being valorized and the others are being effectively shunted to the side.
Probably, yes.
And
probably so.
Right. Yeah. And I
kids are made to feel lesser in all sorts of ways all the time. And this is one other way that this is happening. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So,
But don't you want to, in theory, reduce the number of ways, not increase them?
Sure. But it's I guess I feel like this is a pretty minor one. And if you're a Muslim or a Jew in a public school, you're in the minority. It's you understood that. I understood how many Jews were in my class at Lafayette School and Deal. I got that. I picked it up.
I also got that. And I also went to Quaker school growing up. And I totally hear you about all of this, but the problem to me are not necessarily these particular lessons. It's the toehold, the kind of door that's being opened here. And I'm not usually someone who goes for these kinds of arguments, right?
I agree.
Here we go in this moment in which there are also conservative Christians who want to end sex ed in any useful way and want to teach a lot of things that are not just pious lies, but actual lies, right? And who want to, end the teaching of, quote, divisive concepts in history, so that, like, yeah, you do go back maybe to teaching the lost cause, or you do only talk about the, most sanitized versions of Americans' racial history. And all of this is going to happen in a moment where the country is both having more and more foreign-born people in it, because that's where we are right now, but also having this tremendous backlash against immigration. I don't know. I wonder if you're minimizing the degree to which the separation of church and state in public schools actually really helped over the last century to integrate lots of new people into the United States, that there was this idea that, like, no, we didn't have one faith that was the primary one, and that was different from Europe. And that actually is like a part of our more recent American tradition in a way that we should actually like appreciate.
I was with you until that last part. I mean, I think that the huge waves of immigration, the huge waves of immigrants who came in, including American Jews who came 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago, like, did not come to America where there was a separation of church and state. They came to one which was a Christian culture, and they went to schools. I'm sure your parents and my parents went to schools where there was Christian prayer.
Totally. And they
like they're okay. My parents seemed fine. It was okay. I think you're absolutely right, Emily, that the worrisome part is not that it ends there, but that it ends here, but that it starts here. That this is the beginning of movement very far towards Christianizing institutions, and you're right.
In a way that bolsters social conservatism, like that really does try to change people's outlook and the way that they think about progress and freedom and liberty.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by ZBiotics. After a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. But with ZBiotics, there's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Also, ZBiotics is continuing to invent probiotics that will help with everyday challenges of modern living. Go to zbiotics.com/Gabfest to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Gabfest at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/Gabfest and use the code GABFEST at checkout for 15% off. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Bombas. Bombas just released their comfiest lineup with socks so cozy, your toes will feel as toasty as chestnuts on an open fire. I love my Bombas socks. I just got a 6-pack of ankle socks. I wear them, much to my girlfriend's chagrin. I wear them to sort of more fancy events because they are so comfortable. They feel incredible, and they are the perfect holiday gift. That's because Bombas uses the coziest fabrics, from Sherpa to merino wools and long staple cotton. And Bombas slippers are designed with memory foam and wrapped in Sherpa. You will never want to wear shoes again. And no matter what you get, your purchase creates a clothing donation for someone experiencing housing insecurity. During cold months, that can make a big impact. And if you don't love your Bombas, you're covered with a free and easy return or exchange. So, ready to feel good and do good? Head over to bombas.com/political and use code political for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/political, code political at checkout. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Quince. It is officially cozy season. And if the early morning chill isn't enough to make you want to stay in bed, new bedding from Quince will keep you extra warm and comfy. Slept in last few days, my girlfriend and I. Just the room is dark. It's a little bit chilly outside, but warm in the room. And I have these great new pillowcases from Quince. I used to have queen pillowcases on my pillow, and then I realized I had a really big pillow, so I got some king pillowcases from Quince. And A, they fit my pillow, which is awesome. But B, they're just so delightful and comfortable, and it makes my sleep even better. Quince sheets and pillowcases are soft and luxurious. They use high-quality materials like European linen and organic cotton to give the 5-star hotel feel. And the best part is that, like Quince's clothing, Their bedding is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. So turn up the luxury when you turn in with Quince. Go to quince.com/thegabfest to get free shipping and 365-day returns on your next order. That's QUINCE.com/thegabfest for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thegabfest. Last week, we talked to Caitlin Dickerson of The Atlantic about immigration policy and how the Trump administration could carry out the various promises it has made around deportation and immigration crackdown. This week, we thought we'd continue that theme, but on a different topic, by talking to a brilliant healthcare reporter. So we're joined by Dan Diamond, who covers healthcare and health policy for The Washington Post, to talk about what the country may face with public health and health policy and healthcare funding in a Trump administration. So, Dan, I want to start with a couple of big themes. So
we're going to go right there. I don't get to say that I'm a longtime listener, first-time Gabfester.
You get to say that.
Is this your first time? Wow.
I mean, I've listened to a lot of episodes. I don't think I've ever been on. I've had conversations with you in my head.
Yeah,
while running along the Potomac,
cursing us.
I've had you on TV at least, so I beat out the Gabfest. All right, carry on, David.
And you're always quoting. I would say John quotes a Dan Diamond article maybe once every 6 weeks. Anyway, so Dan, what are a couple of ways the Trump administration is likely to be able to make huge shifts in public health policy, and what are a couple of ways they might want to but won't be able to?
Well, first, again, thanks for having me. This should be inspirational to every listener that if you listen to the Gabfest long enough and pester the hosts, after 15 years, you too will get invited on a episode. The possible ways that the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress could go after healthcare are actually quite large. There is a path of administrative change to healthcare. The Trump administration, in the first iteration, targeted the Affordable Care Act and rolled back some of the efforts to get people enrolled in that law. That would probably happen again. Donald Trump has said that he would be a good steward of that law, but he still thinks it's lousy. J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, says he wants to make changes to the ACA. So I think that's one thing that's top of the list. There's also, in Congress, a fight right now over these tax credits for the Affordable Care Act. These credits were expanded under Joe Biden as a pandemic-era policy. There were about 11 million people signed up for health plans through the ACA 4 years ago. That's nearly doubled, largely thanks to these tax credits. Republicans don't want to continue them. So those likely could either face pressure or go away entirely. And then there are things like changes to Medicaid. Medicaid is the safety net program for Americans. It covers over 70 million people, many low income. There are Republicans in Congress and people who are joining the administration who want to impose new requirements on Medicaid. So if you're an able-bodied adult, you might have to prove that you are either seeking a job, have a job, or are volunteering so much that it counts like a job.
Dan, what are the issues that arise with work requirements? I mean, I think they can seem perfectly reasonable. Why shouldn't people be working? And yet my understanding is they create a lot of barriers for people who then fall off the rolls, because of the bureaucracy. Like, how does it actually work that happens?
No, Emily, you're right. So the first Trump administration allowed work requirements in 13 states. It was widely seen as a failure. Even though 13 states had permission to do the work requirements, only one state, Arkansas, went forward with them. And researchers found a bunch of concerning developments. The work requirements did not boost employment. So it failed on that front. The work requirements added a lot of paperwork and other burdens that you're alluding to. There were people who might have had their healthcare, might have been able to keep it, but they lost it because they were just unable to go through the bureaucratic hoops. And about 18,000 people lost coverage over 9 months or so. So in many cases, that was related to the paperwork. Of those people who lost coverage, more than half said that they had problems getting care because of the cost or getting their prescriptions filled. The courts didn't like it either. A federal judge ordered Arkansas to end the program, to reinstate people who lost coverage. The Supreme Court did not take up this case. Despite all of that, there are Republicans who think this is not only a good policy, it could be a big money saver as they look for ways to pay for the Trump tax cuts.
And Dan, I have so many questions. Where would that money saving come from that they will claim will come from these work requirements?
I think it would come from lower enrollment, John. I mean, the fewer people who have government health care, the less the government has to spend on health care. So if you're Jody Arrington, the House Budget Chair, who is talking about Medicaid changes next year, you look at the possibility of a national work requirement and say that $100 billion in savings come from that. What Jody Arrington and other Republicans aren't talking about as much is that 600,000 fewer people could have health coverage if we had a national work requirement.
Dan, this is a really sad, ignorant question since I'm really close to Medicare age myself. What is Medicare Advantage? Why do people keep talking about it? And how could that grow under a Trump administration? And does it save the government money?
I just want listeners to know, because I can actually see David as he's talking, he does not look anywhere near Medicare age, which is 65 and older. Medicare Advantage is a spinoff of traditional Medicare. It is run by private health insurers. Republicans really like it because you can say, look, we've outsourced to the private industry. They know what they're doing. It does not save the federal government money. It actually adds more cost by every study. And there are patients who sign up for Medicare Advantage because it offers more options. It covers dental care. It covers vision. But it adds often burdens if you are trying to get a procedure done or possibly a prescription filled. There is a lot of red tape associated with Medicare Advantage. And I've heard from numerous patients who say they wanted to get what their doctor told them to get, and then United Healthcare, which runs their Medicare, said no thank you. So I think, David, this is something where if more Americans are shifted onto Medicare Advantage, we'll hear about more Americans having problems.
But so it wouldn't
Medicare
save
coverage.
money necessarily for the government. And is it optional? Is it something which I choose to get on it? Or is it something I might end up being forced to? Could they change Medicare into Medicare Advantage?
At the moment, it is something we choose. There is a physician named Dr. Oz who has been tapped to lead Medicare and Medicaid services. And he has talked in the past about trying to steer people into Medicare Advantage. There have been Republicans who have put forward proposals that would make it automatic that you would be steered into Medicare Advantage. Whether that actually happens, David, I don't know. There are lots of Democrats who would fight that tooth and nail. I've talked to Elizabeth Warren. I've talked to Ron Wyden, who are among the big critics of that plan.
Can we talk a little bit about Trump's nomination of RFK Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services? I feel like in the week or so since that happened, I've been watching a kind of mixed reaction. So I see a lot of vaccination experts whose names I remember from COVID times kind of freaking out and being like, this person is going to be in charge of all of the places in the government that decide what the vaccine schedule is for children, and could really weaken vaccine take-up, herd immunity, by just like asking a lot of questions, expressing skepticism, maybe changing what vaccines are required. And then I also see the reaction of some people, including Democrats, like the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, that seems much more receptive, sort of to the vaccine skepticism to a degree, this idea of like vaccine choice, but also to some of RFK Jr.'s other ideas, which are about like taking on big agriculture and criticizing like the, artificial ingredients in lots of food. Those things which seem to me like really implausible to enact with Republican majorities in Congress, but have a kind of like stick it to the man, like people's health flavor to them. I mean, the man has a lot of views. And so it's a little hard to kind of master all of them and think like, how is this really going to play out if he is confirmed?
Well, I think a lot of those things are true, Emily. The idea that RFK Jr. is one of America's foremost vaccine skeptics and could be in charge of the agencies overseeing vaccines, that's hugely concerning from a public health perspective. It's unprecedented. There's never been anything like that. And I know sometimes folks might say the media sane washes things that are abnormal. I made sure to write that pretty high in our story about Trump picking RFK for that job. At the same time, he does espouse these things where if you just took his name off it and read the transcript, it would sound a lot like the Colorado governor. It would sound a lot like Bernie Sanders. I was on Capitol Hill earlier this week, standing a few feet from Cory Booker, who was saying all the same things about taking on agriculture and big pharma. So some of those ideas, I think, are interesting and worthy from a public health perspective. America has not done well on so many of these metrics. And the way that I've been thinking about it is a little bit like, Nixon going to China. There is no way that Republicans would have ever embraced these ideas. These are liberal ideas on pharma and food. But maybe RFK Jr. is smuggling some of them in to a Trump administration. Whether they actually get enacted and implemented, I don't know, because they fly in the face of what so many Republicans want to do. You could see a clash coming in the months ahead where even if he gets confirmed, Trump doesn't like hearing from his donors who say, these are things we don't want.
Dan, going back to, as I've been writing and talking about the various picks across the different departments, a lot of people have responded by saying, well, the whole point is to destroy. And clearly, in some cases, that's true, that some of these picks, Trumps won't be bothered if they can't run the railroad. But at HHS or in the job that Dr. Oz will have overseeing Medicare and Medicaid, give me the sensible stakes and what might result from just neglect and bad management, so that it's a sort of blasé thing that people say, well, he just wants to destroy it. But I mean, we should be clear-minded about what that would actually mean. And I'm going to tack something on here. You remember from the fights over trying to kill the Affordable Care Act in the first Trump administration, that one of the problems was that Donald Trump had no idea what was in the legislation. He couldn't really talk about it. There was nobody publicly who was a very good advocate for the reforms, as confused as sometimes they might have been. In this case, do you see RFK Jr. having to be the one who, goes out there and plays like, the old Secretary Sebelius role, or who has to basically talk to the public about this? And is that a possible challenge for his job as well?
Wait, can I actually add a third thing onto John's first question, which was just when you talk about what a diminished or less competent HHS might look like, can you also talk about FDA and CDC? I'm just curious how those would be impacted as well within that.
Okay, I'll go through the laundry list to the best of my ability.
Soup.
Well, let me kind of take those in turn. So John is talking about this question, I think, of executive competence or incompetence. And the people who have succeeded in these jobs aren't people like RFK Jr. or Dr. Oz, who are certainly famous and have had high-profile roles, but they're usually people who have been former governors or university presidents. John mentioned Kathleen Sebelius, who's governor of Kansas. People with high-level executive and administrative experience. You need that to lead these giant bureaucratic agencies because there's so much day-to-day grind over extremely technical issues, agencies that are often overlooked until there is some sort of unexpected national scandal or spotlight. I think kind of the second point, though, about who can message and communicate, it's been interesting to me, John, that Trump has gone so heavy on people who are TV ready, people like Dr. Oz, who had a TV show, some of the folks that we've reported on as candidates for big jobs in the health administration, a guy like Marty Makary, who may soon be announced as the FDA commissioner. He's a guy who's been on Fox News. He might have well been on one of your shows, John. So he has, Trump is picking people who he thinks can deliver a message perhaps better than some of the functionaries who were picked the first time. And then to David's point about these other agencies, they're moving incredibly quickly to staff up at senior levels across the Trump government. So we know, as I'm recording with you guys, we know who the HHS pick is. That's our Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We know that Dr. Oz has been picked to run Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act. It has not yet been confirmed who would run CDC, who would run FDA, who would run NIH. Though I did report last week that Jay Bhattacharya, who was a huge critic of NIH, he co-wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, which some of your listeners might remember was a response to federal efforts at lockdowns and other NIH policies.
Super early on, right? Like, just to be clear, like he wasn't criticizing lockdowns like a year in. He was criticizing them in the beginning, right?
He emerged as an early critic of the response. He said that we were overestimating the threat of COVID in early 2020. And then by October 2020, he and two others, a Harvard Medical School professor and an Oxford professor, wrote the Great Barrington Declaration. So it was early, but not quite as early. And we were still several months away from vaccines even being available. So Jay Bhattacharya could end up leading NIH 4 years after NIH leadership tried to knock down the Great Barrington Declaration and really suppress what he was saying.
I do not understand why Dr. Oz would want that job. That job seems like literally the most thankless job in the whole world to run Medicare and Medicaid. Why would you ever want to do that unless you were like Dan Diamond level of nerding out on healthcare policy? It seems like misery, because the only things that can happen are going to be bad. People are going to be complaining. They're going to be losing healthcare coverage, or people on Medicare are going to be like, this has gotten much worse. It just seems like a punching bag job and a deeply bureaucratic job. He will not last a year.
It is not a job that even nerdy Dan Diamond would want. I started my career in healthcare research, and I like being a reporter who doesn't have to manage anybody much more. I mean, CMS, this agency that Oz was tapped for, a decade ago, it was the center of all the Obamacare website sign-up problems. I mean, it was a national catastrophe. It has been a place where these technical problems rise up and become big stories. So Dr. Oz, RFK Jr., I don't know if they know what they're getting into. I asked one of RFK's advisors about this a week ago. I said, are you sure RFK Jr. wants to be hauled to the Hill to talk about all the migrant kids that HHS is responsible for? I mean, this has been a big thing over the past couple of administrations. HHS has lots of responsibilities. One is taking custody of unaccompanied kids at the border. You might remember something about that during the first Trump administration. The HHS secretary was hauled to Congress then. Becerra, the current HHS secretary under Biden, has faced a lot of questions on that too. So it goes well beyond whatever RFK Jr. and Oz want to do. There are a lot of things that they will need to do at these agencies.
And Dan, give me your reaction to this, which is also, well, first on the Dr. Oz as communicator point. People may remember that during the height of COVID, Dr. Oz said, schools are a very appetizing opportunity. I just saw a nice piece in The Lancet arguing the opening of schools may only cost us 3% in terms of total mortality. So 3% in terms of total mortality in a school, in a population of 300 million, that's a lot of dead kids. That would seem to me to be the thing you might not want to say in the middle of a pandemic if you are a public official. But leaving that aside, isn't it also true that what we saw from the first time with healthcare, and one of the reasons that Obamacare was such a challenge politically for President Obama, was healthcare touches really close to people's lives. And with an off-year election in 2026, Trump may do whatever he wants to do. Oz may fail and Kennedy may fail, and people may say, well, that's the whole intent. But the constituents of the Republican members of Congress who are in close districts are going to possibly be angry and take it out on them, which might cause some cross pressures from Capitol Hill. Maybe Trump ignores all of that, but isn't that political dynamic worth paying attention to?
Absolutely. And I mean, just nodding on Dr. Oz, he's made a lot of glib comments as the host of a TV show that got him into some trouble. You get into a lot, much more trouble if you're a federal official making these kind of off-the-cuff remarks. The political calculus on healthcare has always been hard for Republicans, and it's gotten harder. The Affordable Care Act and Medicaid are more popular now than they were day one of Trump's administration. There are many more enrollees. There are about 100 million people covered between those two programs. And the fight over ACA repeal and gutting Medicaid 7 years ago was really damaging for Republicans. Democrats picked up seats basically everywhere in the 2018 midterms. It made some new stars. I remember talking to a guy named Andy Kim, a former government official who had never been elected to office, but he was taking on one of the Republicans leading Obamacare repeal. Kim won that congressional race, and now he's going to be the next senator from New Jersey. So the Obamacare fights in the first administration were hugely damaging to Republicans and a major boost to Democrats. In some ways, John, they kind of want the healthcare fight because it was so useful to them the first time.
You know, one thing this makes me think about, Dan, is to go back to COVID. COVID kind of loomed in this election, at least for a lot of Trump voters, I think, as a source of enormous resentment, that the government's interventions went on too long, that masks didn't really work, even backlash against the vaccine. And it seems like some of these Republican wins kind of rode that wave, and that's different from the dynamic you were just describing, where healthcare debates are good for Democrats. But now there's this question of like, okay, how does that translate into actually holding these offices? In a world in which COVID is, going to recede, but then of course there's also the possibility of another epidemic, another healthcare crisis. The bird flu is kind of, as I understand it, like could not be serious, but also could be a few ticks away from being a serious threat. And I wonder how you think about that part of the equation, like these different parts of recent history and how they overlap or are in conflict with each other.
You're hitting on a theme that we've written about too, this idea of COVID-era grievance against institutions, especially the federal government and public health officials. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., when I talked to him about a year ago, was talking about trying to lock up Anthony Fauci, the public health official who worked for the federal government. Marty Makary, Jay Bhattacharya, these critics might end up running agencies that they've spent years criticizing. It might turn out to be a lot harder when you're on that side, when you're trying to lead the agencies responding to whatever crisis. I think in terms of kind of pandemic positions and public health challenges, Emily, too, I think about what the Trump administration did the first time, what they might do again. Trump pulled us out of the World Health Organization. Joe Biden rejoined it on his first day. It was a signal of America's commitment to fighting viruses around the world, but it also had some strategic value for sharing data and messaging. I think Donald Trump might pull us out again from the World Health Organization on day one. So you can see a retreat from the things that Joe Biden was trying to do in every way. And some of those things could be pretty damaging policy-wise. Dan Diamond is a health policy reporter at the Washington Post. Dan, that was so interesting and enlightening. And good luck. Have a great next 4 years. I'll do my best. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. When you, because in the absence of a strong public health infrastructure, are using alcohol as medicine this weekend, what will you be chattering about, Emily Baz?
I have been really interested in a new online magazine, online publication called ARC. It's about religion and politics and culture. A friend of mine, Mark Oppenheimer, helped start it. And it's just like an interesting collection of writing. I was reading this morning a review of a new book on settler colonialism. The review is by Paul Berman. The book is by Adam Kirsch. And it's just like one of the better book reviews I've read recently, trying to use the book as like a jumping off point for an essay that offers some deeper understanding. So you can find it online, arcmag.org, and check it out.
My chatter comes from my sister Jane, who alerted me to this Italian village, Ololia, which is in rural Italy, that has, after the election, offered homes to Americans for $1. And it seems to me to be a legitimate, who knows if somebody's actually followed through, but an actual gambit. The advertisement says, "Are you warned?" That's the way it's spelled. "Are you warned out by global politics, looking to embrace a more balanced lifestyle while securing new opportunities? It's time to start building your European escape in the stunning paradise of Sardinia." We just really want, said the mayor, and we'll focus on Americans above all. We can't, of course, ban people from other countries to apply, but Americans will have a fast-track procedure. We are betting on them to help us revive the village. They are our winning card. And this was obviously launched after the election. They assumed lots of Americans would be wanting to get out of the country. My second little bit of chatter is
wait,
yes,
just on that. So that Sardinian village is not that a lot of towns in Sicily have done that. I actually watched a TV show about a guy who had bought a house for $1 in a Sicilian town, and it was hilarious because the house is
down.
such a piece of shit. It's so falling down, and he's like, "Oh, I think in 6 months we'll have it fixed up," and then they sort of check back with him a year later, and it's like, he's just barely dredged the basement, cleared the bat skeletons out of the basement by then. It's discovering all kinds of other horrors in it. And finally, like 2 years later, he has a really nice house after he's spent $85,000 just to clean it up. So be careful what your $1 gets.
My other brief chatter is that so I learned something in my reading this week that I've been mistaking my whole life. There's so many things in that category, but blind man's bluff was what I thought it was always called. No. It's blind man's buff, B-U-F-F.
Huh.
And a buff is like a bat being hit lightly, sort of a love tap. And it was from the game Blind Man's Buff, where they would blindfold you in like the, I guess, 17th century, and then people would buff you, and you would have to try to tag them. And if you tag them, then they would be it, and they'd have to do the blindfold. And so they'd be, running around their living rooms while somebody's on the pianoforte or something, and playing blind man's buff. But somehow, through the way language goes, I guess because you stumble around blindly without kind of purpose or expertise. And that's how bluff kind of got associated. But anyway, it's BUFF, not BLUFF.
Wow, revelation.
Yeah.
My chatter is a wonderful feature in Slate that I stumbled on this morning, which is a feature by Dan Kois and J. Brian Lauder, the 25 most important recipes of the past 100 years. And it's fantastic. It's not about like the Times just did the 25 most important cookbooks of the past 100 years. The Slate is recipes, and it's just about particular dishes like Julia Child's Boeuf Bourguignon, or the Caesar salad is the first one on the list from 1925 or something. To, soups, trendy TikTok soups that you've heard about. It's really, really fascinating and interesting history of food and a lot of fun. Check it out.
I love that idea. I don't understand the point of Caesar salad. It's just like a little bit of lettuce, like coated with Parmesan cheese.
Delicious.
What do you mean you don't understand? You've just described heaven. Look at the cacio e pepe. Cacio e pepe is just...
It's like not a salad. Like it's so
what is it?
unhealthy.
It's not a ham sandwich.
Salad is supposed to be... There's so many ways to make salad healthy and really delicious, and Caesar salad is just like unhealthy, and I don't like Parmesan cheese.
Now you're just...
This is like Conundrum show material,
yes.
Emily.
Yes, breathing to me, it's such an annoyance.
Who doesn't like Parmesan cheese?
How do you...
I mean, it's fine. It just like doesn't, I don't know. I don't really get why you would cover your salad
anchovies? Oh my God. So are you a non-cheese on salad? Is it like, the Italians don't put cheese on their shellfish. Are you a non-cheese on salad person?
I can handle a little bit of cheese. It's cheese is basically the main ingredient that I don't understand.
But the anchovies, come on. Any vehicle for anchovies are wonderful.
I like anchovies. I do like
listeners, you've got chatters. They're not as hot and sexy as Emily's Caesar salad take, but they're still probably pretty good. You email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. There were some really good ones this week. And this one from Mark is made for John Dickerson and for me.
Hello, this is Mark Allender from Cleveland, Ohio. And my chatter is that there's going to be a new Netflix series out about the assassination of President James Garfield. And it's going to have a star-studded cast with Michael Shannon as Garfield, Matthew McFadden as Charles Guiteau, Nick Offerman as Chester A. Arthur, Betty Gilpin as Crete Garfield, Bradley Whitford as James Blaine, Shea fucking Wiggum as Roscoe Conkling, and Jaco Ivanek as Dr. Willard Bliss. His first name was Doctor. It promises to be a great series, and hope y'all check it out. Thank you.
That's all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the harassment of newly elected Democratic House member Sarah McBride, the first trans member of Congress, the successful campaign by House Speaker Mike Johnson and Nancy Mace to bar trans women from using women's bathrooms on Capitol Hill and trans men from using men's bathrooms. Just blatant prejudice, and it's gross, and we'll talk about that. That is only for Slate Plus members, who also get discounts to our live shows. They get bonus episodes on all Slate podcasts or many Slate podcasts. They never hit the paywall on the Slate site. So if you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That's our show for today. The Gabfest was produced today by Kevin Bendis. Thank you, Kevin. Our researcher is Julie Huygen. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is the VP of Audio for Slate. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week, Thanksgiving week.